you're watching this video, then most likely you're probably a big Battlefield fan just like me, and most likely you've wondered if it's possible for Battlefield to return back to its glory days. But before we talk about if the Battlefield franchise can be redeemed or not, I do want to look back to when my journey first started with Battlefield. Luckily, my first experience with Battlefield happened to be Battlefield Bad Company 2, and after playing that game and experiencing the all-out warfare that game had to offer, I was absolutely hooked on the franchise since then. But what was the most surreal on that game was just the amount of destruction that you can do. Definitely for somebody like me that came from the Call of Duty universe, and just really never got to see anything like that before, and to experience that for the first time was just absolutely mind-blowing. Bad Company 2 had a pretty respectable campaign. It wasn't on the same level as Call of Duty back then, but it was still pretty good enough for the series. If we look nowadays with Battlefield 2042 and that game not even releasing with a campaign, you definitely would have thought the multiplayer would have came out in an excellent and stable shape, but that just wasn't the case. So for them to take time away from the campaign and put all their time into multiplayer, it really shows it doesn't come down to quantity, it comes down to quality. I think that's something that's really lacking nowadays, but if we're looking at quality, then Battlefield 3 can definitely not be ignored, because to me, and I think most people would consider Battlefield 3 to be the best of all time. Again, in Battlefield 3, we did get a pretty decent campaign, with just a phenomenal multiplayer. In this game, we also seen a brand new arsenal of guns and vehicles added to the franchise. I would also say that Battlefield 3 maps was the pinnacle of Battlefield map designs in the Battlefield series, and out of these designs, we were introduced to some of the classics that we know and love, like Operation Metro, Operation Firestorm, and Caspian Border, which most of these great maps we've seen in Battlefield 3 were added to Battlefield 4. There were definitely a bunch of similarities between Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4. Battlefield 4 did introduce some new things, like more evolution to maps, some weapons, and some vehicles, but if we do look from an innovation point of view, Battlefield 4 just did not innovate as much as Battlefield 3 did. They really did build off Battlefield 3 going into Battlefield 4, which is very understandable considering how well Battlefield 3 did. And Battlefield 4 is still a game that I play to this day. It does still have a pretty good player base on there. I think that really just speaks how much fun the game is, and definitely seems like the developers are having a ton of fun making the game with all the Easter eggs they added in, like us getting the Phantom Bow, which is the first compound bow added to a Battlefield game, and we also seen the Megalodon Easter egg. But when it comes to originality, nothing speaks more volumes than Battlefield Hardline. In everybody's mind, cops and robbers don't sound like a bad idea, but I think when it comes down to Battlefield Hardline, it just did not truly feel like a Battlefield game. But don't get me wrong, the game definitely felt fun at times, but when it comes to all-out warfare and massive destruction that you look for naturally in a Battlefield game, this game was just lacking so much. I think for most people, the game was just a little bit too fast-paced, but on the bright side, this might be the only Battlefield we ever got to tase somebody in. I really do want to give Battlefield props for trying something different, because nowadays we see gaming companies really recycle the same game over and over year after year, and we see a prime example of this with Call of Duty. But Battlefield definitely took a step forward with Battlefield 1. Most video games was going back in history around this time. I think this was around the time we seen Call of Duty World War II release, but Battlefield decided to go a little bit more farther back and went with a World War I approach. I am kind of sad to say, but I really did not get to play this game during its prime too much. I had made videos about Battlefield 1, but it's really only been in the past year or two. At the time, I was really just too busy playing other games, but this game does still have a pretty good player base, so that kind of speaks volumes about how the game has been perceived all these years. But no doubt, out of all the Battlefields, this one is the most atmospheric, but truly this game was incredible and unlike any other game at the time. If you were truly looking for your World War I experience, then this was definitely the game. The gunplay on here was definitely unmatched compared to any other Battlefield games, and the game as a whole was just so cinematic and action-packed, and it truly felt like using a movie at times. But when we do look at Battlefield 5, we can see some aspects from Battlefield 1, but just truly not on the same level. Instead of World War I, Battlefield 5 went with a World War II setting, and they really didn't stay true to the lore of World War II. They did go a little bit more on the fictional side. But around this time in gaming, it kind of felt like people were over the World War I and World War II settings. People were looking more towards the future. And that's kind of why 5's success just wasn't as great. And also, they quit adding content into the game pretty early in its life cycle. And around this time, Battle Royale games were really popping off, Fortnite was on the rise, and so Battlefield tried dipping their hand in that pool, but like most things with Battlefield 5, things just got cut short and just did not pan out the way they thought. And it's definitely sad to see them do this because the game did have a good amount of potential, and the gameplay was pretty fun, and like I said, you can find some of those crazy cinematic moments in this game as well. But most definitely you can say Battlefield 5 missed the mark, but it didn't truly miss the mark like Battlefield 2042 did. With Battlefield 2042, we really did see how disconnected they were from their fan base, but one thing Battlefield does really well is deliver on some pretty kick-ass trailers, and they are absolute masterminds when it comes to promoting their games. But with these trailer comparisons, compared to the game when it fully released, it's just a complete 180 from what we was expecting from the trailers. And most notably, not everybody was expecting just the absolute lack of weapons and maps and just all-out content in the game. I do believe this is the Battlefield that launched with the lowest amount of weapons. But this being a live service, I feel like this is what most games were doing, and they're still doing to this day. They have content ready, but they'll just spread it out throughout the year to make it look like it's new content, but really it's just reused content that we've seen in previous games. The game did release with a good amount of maps, but the map quality was just absolutely horrendous. Battlefield promised an open sandbox, and that's literally what we feel like we got, which is like a complete open sandbox just full of sand and nothing around. Every map was just so barren, and you couldn't hardly find any cover, and every map, after a while, just started to feel the same. But on the bright side, we did see a tornado every once in a while, and that was pretty cool. I did like the weather effects, but I just wish they could have done more with them. But really the biggest key missing in Battlefield 2042 was its destruction. And for a Battlefield game, you would have thought destruction was a priority, but clearly with this game development, it just wasn't. But over time, we did see Battlefield rectify some of these mistakes. They did add in some maps that were more filled out, and they went back and remastered a few maps. They also added in some new and some old weapons. A lot of these weapons we did see from the Portal game mode, and the Portal game mode itself was just a big letdown. It was something that we thought would be the future of Battlefield, but completely just missed the mark as well. And 2042 just had a real lack of identity. You really didn't know what they were kind of going for with this game, and I think they were too busy trend chasing at the time. With this Battlefield, we definitely seen them go the route of Call of Duty, and they tried adding in some cool looking skins, but there was a good amount of backlash for this, and by doing this, I think they really lost focus on what really matters in a Battlefield game. Now let's get to the big question, and that's if the Battlefield franchise can be redeemed or not. The short answer is yes, of course, anything can be redeemed, but with 2042 being such a disaster it was, I truly believe Battlefield 6 is going to be a make or break Battlefield for the franchise. And of course, being a longtime fan of the series, I'm definitely hoping that they can pull through and develop a great Battlefield. I think it's what we're all hoping for. And we have heard them give out some news about the new Battlefield going back to more of a modern setting, more like Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4. That's definitely the way to go, I think, and that's definitely what players have been asking for. I would absolutely love if they can make Battlefield 3 just as great as Battlefield 3 was, but that's definitely going to be a hard task to achieve. But I do believe they can get close if they prioritize themselves in the right direction. No doubt Battlefield 2042 had a lot of problems, but like I said, they did rectify some of those mistakes, and by them doing this, we did see they implemented some good maps, so definitely it's possible for them to make some good maps like they did in previous titles, and add in some decent, fun content. But we really just need to see this at the start of Battlefield 6. Now me personally, I'm not the biggest fan of the Battle Pass system, but since we live in a live service industry nowadays, I think it's almost a guarantee that Battlefield 6 will have this. Now I won't be mad if they do, but I think it's just so crucial they focus on the features that was lacking in Battlefield 2042, like game modes and maps and just content of that sort. And also no doubt destruction has to be the main focus for the next Battlefield game. It's kind of hard to believe that I even have to bring this up because the sole point of Battlefield has just always been its destruction. But in 2042, like I mentioned before, they just completely missed the mark with destruction in that game. But they did actually have a decent amount of destruction in the Portal mode, which was kind of weird to see them have it there and not in the original game. And I also do believe that Battlefield 6 is going to be using a new engine. We might see a whole nother level of destruction that we haven't seen in games past. But when it comes to gunplay, we definitely need to see a complete 180 from 2042. 2042's gunplay just felt a little bit too loosey-goosey, and it felt like a little bit more like COD instead of the natural Battlefield feeling, more heavier and making shots count instead of whoever's the quickest with their weapons. I would really like if Battlefield's gunplay could feel a little bit like Insurgency Sandstorm. I definitely know they are different games, but on that game, the way the guns feel and most definitely sound is pretty phenomenal. On Insurgency Sandstorm, every gun really does have its own unique feel to it. I think it's just something I was missing in 2042. Because most guns, after a while, just started to feel the same and they never really used to vary in any different way. And I'm not sure what the reasoning is because I feel like in previous Battlefields, the guns did always feel unique, but like I mentioned, this just is not the case with 2042. But most definitely another crucial aspect for Battlefield 6 is going to be its map designs. If you think back to any good Call of Duty or Battlefield game, Most definitely, all they had in common were good maps, and you also do need some good gunplay, and these two things definitely go hand in hand. But like I mentioned, I think Battlefield has the ability to create good maps, like we've seen in the later life cycle of 2042, but these maps need to be brought to the forefront of Battlefield 6 at launch, and if they do this, I think the game will have a pretty good chance of doing well. And most definitely Battlefield 6 being a modern setting, I would definitely think we would see a lot of old Battlefield 3 maps added to the game, but I do also hope to see some good original maps for Battlefield 6. I think originality is just so important because we have seen in some games maps and everything being reused over and over again, and the game just gets so tiring so quick. And a good example of this is MW3 that came out a couple years ago. That game launched with a bunch of MW2 maps. I think it was actually only MW2 maps, and people definitely found out just adding in really good maps to a whole new gunplay system, it doesn't mean the game's going to be great. That's why I think it's very important for your gunplay and map design to be brought from the ground up together, and I'm just hoping we really do see that in Battlefield 6. Now, I will say I was pretty surprised to see Battlefield 2042 add in some new vehicles to the game, but they kind of missed the mark like they did with the rest of the game, because we did see airboats drive up skyscrapers in the beginning of the game, so there's definitely some balancing issues that needed to be done, but hopefully they can actually learn from this and do well with the next Battlefield. But if Battlefield 6 don't add in any new vehicles, that is honestly fine with me. I think what's just so important is just to have your traditional vehicles like Humvees, tanks, jets, helicopters, things of this such. But really, to cap this video off, everything rests in Battlefield hands at this point. Of course, we have no say on how the game gets developed, but we do have an opinion, and I think if Battlefield listens to our opinions and finally gives us everything we've been asking for in years and everything we come to expect in a Battlefield game, then I think Battlefield 6 can really be a great Battlefield. We are still pretty far away from Battlefield 6's release, but we have heard some good things about the game. But I do take everything with a grain of salt, because Battlefield 2042 looked good on paper but came out just being a disaster, and that really left a lot of bad taste in everybody's mouth. And because of this, I think Battlefield 6 is going to be a crucial game in the Battlefield franchise. Like I said, I think this is make or break right now. But most definitely let me know down in the comments if you think the Battlefield franchise can be redeemed or not. Like I said, I believe it can, but it solely relies on Battlefield listening to its players, its community, and just doing the right thing.